Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm here with a very special, kind of strange back issue haul because today I have a collection of comics that I've just received off of Kickstarter. I have an omnibus with some actual back issues in it, and then I have this. It's a back issue, but it's a back issue of Ladies' Home Journal from 1950. So why did I get this absolutely gigantic issue of Ladies' Home Journal? Well, we're going to get to that one later. Let's start with the Kickstarter books, though. Just happened to have a bunch of Kickstarter books come in. When I say I just happened to, the way it actually works is when I was doing my Kickstarter for my comic, Crime Busters number 5, I'm doing cross promotion with people. I'm seeing campaigns. Normally, I'm too busy really to go on Kickstarter when I'm making my comics and stuff. So I don't know what's going on there while I'm not on there. But when I have a campaign live, I'm doing cross promotions with people. I'm looking at other people's campaigns all the time. And I end up buying a bunch of stuff. And so what happens is something like this, where a few months later, the baby gets born, and all of a sudden, all the stuff that I pledged back in February or whenever all arrives. Now, as it happens, the array of comics that I got weren't all from just then. I had some from that have come from months earlier from previous campaigns, but they all happened to arrive at the same time. So I thought I'd show them off here, starting with Miskatonic High number 17. Now, I've talked quite a bit about Miskatonic High in the past. I've showed off back issues of Miskatonic High in previous haul videos. I also did interviews with both the writer, Mike Shea, and the artist, Ryan Mendoza. So I've talked a lot about Miskatonic High. And this is issue 17. One of the things I've talked about is how all 17 issues have been out on Kickstarter. So in terms of using Kickstarter as the primary distribution platform, I think Miskatonic High does it better than pretty much anybody's been doing. And as the title would suggest, it's about high school students at the Miskatonic High, which is next to Miskatonic University. So it's all Cthulhu, Lovecraft stuff. And I really enjoy these stories. It's right in my wheelhouse. It's in a sort of similar field as Crime Busters, with sort of students investigating supernatural mysteries. And right now, this is a part of a series where after the first 2 arcs, each of the issues is basically following 1 or 2 of the characters on solo adventures. You definitely get you bang for your buck here. This issue, I think, was over 30 pages. It was like 31 pages of action, and really enjoyed it quite a bit. So really like Miskatonic High. I love what Mike and Ryan are doing there, what they've built there. Something I always try and emulate is their success there. So it is really cool. All right. Here's another book that I got off a Kickstarter. Very different, but it's the sort of thing I've talked about in the past. It's Super Heresy's Showcase 1971. Now, you may pick up on the fact that the cover here is actually an homage to the cover of Superman versus Muhammad Ali. And what Super Heresy's Showcase is it's a comic where they're taking superhero characters from the Golden Age, from the 40s, and showing like their adventures during the Bronze Age. So it's set in 1971. It's done sort of in a 1971 style. I did a whole video at one point about this sort of indie sort of a retro movement where there's a lot of people using the public domain characters from the 40s and reimagining them in a Bronze Age style. Again, it's similar to what I'm doing with Crime Busters, although my characters are still in the 50s, back when the original series is going. But Super Heresy Showcase is another one where they're taking these classic characters and reimagining them. And this issue, they have different themes. I've previously read the 1970 Spotlight. The 1971 is basically talking about the characters involved are all characters of color, and so it's sort of talking about some race issues and different things like that. Topics that are obviously relevant today, but specifically were relevant and being discussed really for the first time in comics in 1971, 1972. So he's sort of using the comics history and social history sort of to guide um, the path of the comic itself. And there's some really cool reimaginings of what the Golden Age characters might have had to deal with, particularly, since a lot of the gold, characters from the Golden Age aren't necessarily the most sensitively created characters. So anyway, really like what they're doing here with this book as well, what the creator's doing. So, and again, I've talked about other books that are sort of in the same sort of field as well, like the Sentinels from Roy Johnson, which is Golden Age characters but set in the Bronze Age, imagining what would happen if their titles had never been canceled, how they would have developed. The people at Atomic have a whole line of those. There's several that I've showed off before from different publishers that are doing something similar. So this sort of fits right in with that little sub collection that I have going of Kickstarter creators who are using these public domain characters sort of as a stand-ins for Bronze Age stuff. So as a fan of the Bronze Age and public domain characters, I kind of like that sort of thing. Here's something very different. I actually bought this for my wife as a present, so this is hers. She's a huge fan of Peter Pan, and so I got this. It's the first issue of Lost Boy. The production value on this is absolutely tremendous. Like, just the not just the cover design and the cover art, which is all great, but like it's got this sort of gold leaf effect on the cover. Like it's very high quality. The production, the printing quality, everything about it is really top notch. And then like the art inside is excellent. And this is basically a reimagining of the Peter Pan tale. It takes place during the Victorian era, so it's sort of like what if Charles Dickens had written Peter Pan. Now, my wife is as I mentioned, a big Peter Pan fan. She didn't actually love it that much because her thought on it was because it was so Dickensian, whereas like the street urchins and the Hook is sort of like the Fagin character, is basically, instead of having a bunch of kids that never grow up, it seemed like it was about kids who have to grow up way too fast. So she felt like it was kind of inverting what she likes about Peter Pan. But you may not like it better than she did, and you can't fault the production. Like, I get a lot of stuff from indie creators, self-publishers, not just in Kickstarter, and a lot of stuff you get there's a huge range from very amateurish to very professional. This is at the top side of the very professional. Like, the way it's done is just very professionally done. So it's excellently made. Finally, we have this. Speaking of excellently made, it's the first issue of Mara. Now, you might notice how big it is. So here's a regular size comic for comparison. See, it's much larger. What you can't see on the video is that it's also kind of like, it's perfect bound square, and it's got this sort of matte feel. And so it very much feels like, less like a comic book and more like a children's sort of picture book in terms of the production, the printing, the way it's done. The art on the cover is fantastic. I mean, the art on the inside is good too. But actually it does have a sort of like, in some areas it has sort of a children's book feel, like with the spirit animals and stuff. But it's very much not for children. like here's a sequence where a dude cuts two people in half. So not for kids. But again, like the art was great. It's a fantasy series, but you can see that they're clearly like taking a lot of stuff from like Native American indigenous traditions for this. My wife, as I mentioned before, is native, so um, I always try and keep my eye out for comics with native protagonists or themes. And so anyway, let's just it is the first issue, and it's you can kind of get a hint as to where the story may be going, but it's basically not even really the beginning of the plot. It's more like the setup for the series. So I don't know how often it's going to come out, but I feel like you're going to need a lot more chapters to really get into it, but really well made. So those are the Kickstarter books. Now, let me show you the omnibus that I got. And here it is. It's, I think someone might have mentioned this on a previous video, but it is the Wonder Woman Diana Prince celebrating the 60s omnibus, which is an interesting title for this because most of the comics in here didn't come out in the 60s. They came out in the 70s. But this is collecting all of the mod era Wonder Woman comics. So what it has in it is Wonder Woman 178 to 196 and 199 to 204. They skipped 197 to 198 because those were reprint issues. Brief digression, I've mentioned this before, I think, but there was some editorial changes at that time going on, and they had back-to-back reprint issues at a time when the series was bi-monthly. And the comics they were reprinting, because this was during the mod era, they wanted to just basically keep the reprints to the mod books, so they were reprinting stories that had just come out within the last like 2 years. And so what you had was a 6-month period where there was no new Wonder Woman stuff coming out between issues 196 and 199. And I've read all those because I have them all. And you can see in the statement of ownership that the sales took a huge nosedive during this period. So this was a terrible mistake to do that. But anyway, so it basically has the complete mod era Wonder Woman, starting with 178, which is the issue where that begins, and then leading through 204. Now, 204 is the first issue where Robert Conrad comes back. It's where I Ching gets killed. Diana gets her powers back. It's the first appearance of Nubia. It's an interesting place to leave it off. You do have to have that story to complete the mod era storyline, but the story in 204 is the first part of a trilogy, and this does not include the second and third parts because those aren't part of this mod era. So in that sense, it's incomplete, but it does have all of the mod era, including her guest appearances. So this also includes Lois Lane 93, Brave and the Bold 87, Brave and the Bold 105, Adventure Comics 397, and World's Finest 204. Now, at one point I had all of those, but I don't have them all anymore. I no longer have the World's Finest. Not sure about the Brave and the Bold. I think I'm missing one of them. So I decided to get this even though I already own all of these because 2 reasons. A, it was really cheap. So the normal price is $125. I paid $65. That includes shipping for this. So it was almost half off. And again, I'm trying to continually downsize when I can. And this is a situation where I really want these to read because this is my favorite era of Wonder Woman. I don't necessarily need to keep all the originals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell most of the originals from this run. I'm going to keep 178 and 179. I'm going to keep 199 and 200 with the classic covers from Jeffrey Catherine Jones. Those I'm going to keep, probably sell all the rest, and hopefully I'll get enough money from selling all the rest of those to make my money back on the omnibus. That would be best case scenario. So we'll see how that goes. But for half off, I couldn't resist, especially since it included some of the crossover issues that I no longer have in my collection. It did get a little crunched on the front corner here in shipping. They only had 3 copies left when I bought this off of Amazon. The other places where I normally get omnibuses were sold out. So I don't know how many of these made. I don't know if they're still available, but you might want to take a look around, because if it is still available, you might be able to get it at a discount. And if it's not still available, some of these omnibuses go out of print and then they get ridiculously expensive. So I also wanted to get it while I had the chance. Finally, that brings us to the Ladies' Home Journal. Now, this is much larger than I was expecting when I bought it. It's absolutely massive. Massive. You can see it's bigger than I am. This copy is also not in great shape. The back cover has been completely... The edge has been, the spine has been completely eaten away by bugs or whatever. So it's not in great condition. And it has nothing to do with comic books. So why did I get this? Well, I'm going to show you why I got this. In this issue, there is an excerpt from a book which was called Bells on Their Toes. And this was the sequel to the more famous book, Cheaper by the Dozen. So it's a sequel to Cheaper by the Dozen. And in this is this painting here. And the reason I bought this is for this painting, because if you look at this little girl over here, that little girl is my mother. So at the time, this came out in 1950. So at the time this came out, my mom had just turned 3, but she would have been about 2.5 when that was painted. So at the time, my mother rather, was living with her parents, my grandparents, down in Maryland. And their neighbor, who was a good friend of my grandparents, was a painter. He was a guy, I just completely blanked. His name was Vernon Nye. He later got some minor fame, mostly for doing paintings of the California coast. But that was much later. At this time, he was apparently working with this other artist who was doing stuff for Ladies' Home Journal. And Vernon Nye used my mother as a model for some of his paintings. And apparently... one thing led to another, and my mother and her brother, my Uncle Ted, who's also in this painting, although you just see the back of his head. The only one of the children that you really see in the painting is my mother. Through Vernon Nye, they ended up being used as models for this painting. I had never heard anything about this, didn't know anything about it, but I was doing some genealogy research, and my brother actually came across, while we were doing it, a newspaper article from the local paper here that mentioned this. So I bought this off of eBay because it's got a painting of my mother in it. I put it away because it's super musty, and it was really bothering me having it that close to my breathing apparatus here. But yeah, now I know that there's a couple other things, publications that we had at one point and no longer have, some religious books that my mother was painted in as well, but I don't know the details. I don't know, there's a giant series of Bible stories or something, and she was used as a model somewhere in that series. I'm not sure it'll be possible to track that down, but I wanted to get this, because of that. Of course, my mother's no longer with us, but it's really cool to have this painting of her as a child from when she was 2. So that's why I have this giant issue of Ladies' Home Journal. Probably not going to be buying any more issues of Ladies' Home Journal. This one's probably enough, but that's the story behind that. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.